A winter afternoon in Miami casts a pale yellow glow over everything. The last rays of light shine through the large glass windows of Barry Gibb's mansion, creating shimmering reflections on the polished wooden floor. At 80, the artist who once rocked the world with the timeless melodies of the Bee Gees now lives in the slow rhythm of old age, but his heart carries an irreplaceable emptiness. Barry sits by the old piano, his hands trembling slightly on the black and white keys. This piano has been associated with hundreds of songs, thousands of memories, and the hearty laughter of the three brothers. He sighs. And then, as usual, Barry gently strums a few notes. The sound is so bare it hurts. No one knew that, after decades of glory, what weighed heavily on his heart was not age, nor the silence of the stage, but a silent tragedy that haunted Barry throughout his final years, a tragedy deeper than any loss he had ever experienced. Since his brothers passed away, Barry became the only remaining member of the Bee Gees. The public often spoke of him as a living icon, a surviving legend. But for Barry, being the last was not glorious. It was like a cruel reminder that he had to live with memories that returned every night in his dreams. Sometimes he heard Robin's laughter somewhere in the corner of the room. Sometimes he saw Maurice fiddling with the strings in the studio, as carefully as before. And sometimes, in the quiet afternoons, he felt like Andy, the youngest brother with the warm smile, was standing behind him, putting his hand on his shoulder, whispering, "Third brother, write another song." But beautiful memories are also a double-edged sword, because every time Barry returned to reality, he only saw a vast emptiness. He lived in the silence of the large house, where every room reminded him of moments that would never return. People say that pain will fade with time. But for Barry, time deepened that pain. One October morning, when the sea breeze blew into the cool porch, Barry received a call from Lonnie, his longtime manager. Lonnie's voice had something strangely hesitant. "Barry, we need to talk about your health." He was silent. At 80 years old, he knew what that voice was hiding. Barry had been having memory problems for a few months now. At first, it was just small things, forgetting his keys, forgetting the name of a familiar technician, forgetting appointments. But then it got worse. One day, he woke his wife, Linda, at 2 a.m. to ask, "Are we done recording the new album yet?" The album had been released 50 years ago. Lonnie continued, his voice low. "The doctor wants me to get tested. They're worried. I have signs of progressive dementia." Barry closed his eyes. The words stabbed him deep. His career, his life, was built on music and memories. If his memories faded, what would he have left? It wasn't old age that scared him. It wasn't death that scared him. What had him in such agony was the possibility of losing the few memories he had of his brothers. That night, Barry couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, staring at the family photos. From the black and white photos of the early days with Maurice and Robin, to the colorful shots of the Bee Gees at their peak, they all flashed before his eyes like a rewind. Barry reached out with a trembling hand to touch the frame. "My children," he whispered, "what if one day I can't remember your faces?" Tears fell, without him knowing. That was the tragedy Barry carried in his heart, a tragedy more painful than the pain of loss. The fear of losing the memories of the people he loved most. No one could understand him better than Linda. She walked over, gently placing her hand on Barry's shoulder. "You're not alone. Even if your memory changes, love never disappears." He turned, looking at the face of the woman who had accompanied him for nearly 6 decades. "But if you don't remember, then who will you be?" "You're still Barry," Linda smiled sadly. "And you're still the person your siblings love, even though they're not here." In the months that followed, Barry began undergoing medical tests. The initial results showed that he had mild memory loss, but the risk of progression was high in the next few years. He tried to hide this from the media, but in his heart, Barry knew he had to face the truth. What made him bitterest was the irony of fate. The artist who wrote immortal love songs all his life could lose those same songs in his mind. One night, Barry tried to play "How Deep Is Your Love" again, a song he had composed with his brothers. But when he reached the chorus, he suddenly stopped. The notes that were like his breath suddenly became unfamiliar. He put his hand to his forehead, feeling a terrifying emptiness. "No, don't take it away," he whispered in despair. Barry had never felt so weak. In that fear, a ray of light suddenly appeared. Linda suggested he record his memories, not the melodies, but the stories of his brothers. "At least we'll keep them. Even if your memory changes, these will still be here." And so, every afternoon, Barry sat down in front of the tape recorder. He told about Robin, the man with the broken soul. He told about Maurice, the silent musical genius who always stood behind the scenes. He told about Andy, the young man who always shone despite his short life. Those stories were not lamentations. They were like letters to his 3 brothers who had passed away. The more he told them, the more Barry felt his memories were more solid, clearer, because he had transferred them from his heart to the recording pages, like a person keeping the last treasure of his life. Despite his age and health, Barry had one thing on his mind: to give one last performance, not to celebrate his career, but to honor the Bee Gees. He told Linda, "If I could stand on stage again, I would sing for you." Linda held his hand tightly. "Then we will do it." And that special performance was held the year Barry turned 80. A small concert, attended only by his closest friends. No media, no professional cameras, no fancy stages. Just Barry Gibb and the music. When he appeared, everyone stood up, hundreds of eyes filled with tears. Barry slowly sat down at the piano. He said, his voice warm, "Tonight, I sing not for myself. I sing for those who have gone away. And I sing so I won't forget." The piano sounded. He sang words, "I started a joke," and finally, "How deep is your love?" Although his voice was weak, each line contained all the emotions of 8 decades of life. When the song ended, he whispered softly, "This song is for you." And the audience fell silent, the sacred silence that only true music can bring. That night, when everyone had gone home, Barry walked out to the backyard, where the sea breeze blew cold but gentle. He looked up at the starry sky, slowly closing his eyes. In that moment, he felt as if he could hear his brother's laughter somewhere, soft, warm, like a word of encouragement. Barry smiled. "I haven't forgotten," he said into the wind. "And I never will." At 80, despite the fear of losing his memories, the most precious possession of his life, Barry Gibb still holds on to the belief that love and music transcend the limits of time. And that is what makes his tragedy more heartbreaking and beautiful than all the pain life has ever brought.